future is the past. This is something I hear Carla say all the time. As a psychologist, working with families, good and bad, if you want to know what the future is going to hold, look at the past. And this is so very true. And it brings Carl and I a little bit of comfort because we're experiencing some upheaval in our lives. And the upheaval is that Ariella is now a senior. So next year, she's headed to college. And I won't be there whenever she, has a boyfriend. I won't be there to, read over her papers and, check her grades all the time. I won't be there when she comes home every evening. What am I to do? Some of you have been there, have done that. A little bit of comfort and advice would be very helpful. It's stressing Carl and I out a little bit. But something that does bring us comfort is the best predictor of the future is what? The past. Ariella's got great grades in the past. She's been super responsible in the past. She hasn't brought a boyfriend around for my approval in the past. So, it brings Carl and I comfort because of who Ariella has been. We know she'll succeed at college. We know she'll get great grades. We know that things are going to go so well for her because the best predictor of the future is the past. Did I say that okay, Ariella?
Sure.
Did I embarrass you a little bit? No, you're used to it? We are proud of you. And we know you're going to do well. I share that with you because the same is true for Methodists. What will determine our future is our past. So it's important for us to explore our past, to dig into our past, because it is going to lead us into the future. So let's do a little bit of history today. And this is like History 101 or like the Cliff Notes of history about John Wesley. There's so much more that could be said. But let me say just a few things about Wesley. It was in the 1700s in England that John and Susanna Wesley gave birth to a plethora of kids. One was John. And John's dad, Samuel, was a priest in the Anglican Church, the Church of England. One story from John's young life is the parsonage caught on fire. And he was in the second floor and nobody could get to him. But a stranger came out of the crowd, climbed up a water spout, went into the burning building, and brought John out. And from that point on, people thought that God had a special call on John's life. Now, in those days in England, there was this new theological idea that was really sweeping through the seminaries, but it was also infecting the churches as well. And this is a theological understanding of deism. And deism is this understanding of God being the cosmic clockmaker, that God wound the world up, created all things, and then he stepped aside and just watches it all unwind, watches it all unfold, watches the time tick by. And it really removed God from the day in and day out, stuff that was going on in people's lives and in the world. And it certainly wasn't biblical, but it was sort of the new trendy thing to believe. And it was really getting into the seminaries and getting into the churches. And John Wesley was born into this really wrestling with deism. John also grew up in a world that was sort of falling apart. Read about gin in the 1700s in all of Europe and the gin craze and the things that were happening. Europe was in some ways falling apart physically and certainly spiritually. A lot of bad things were happening. Now, John Wesley, in this background, felt calling to ministry. He wanted to be a pastor like his dear old dad. Ariella made me want to be a pastor. That's okay. Boy, now I'm getting sidetracked. Ariella is thinking to go to school to be a physician assistant. Do you know what I went to school for my freshman year? Yeah, being a physician assistant, that's right. So maybe your freshman year, you'll get a calling in the ministry, and that would be super. Regardless, my mind, it's my cold. It's affecting my mind when I'm going to rapid trains. John Wesley. John Wesley, with this backdrop, he started going to school to be a minister. And he got a group of students together and called it the Holy Club. And they met together frequently. And they studied the Bible, and they had communion, they sang together, and it was very rigid. It was very regimented. It was very methodical, the ways that they were doing their worship together. And guess what people called them, making fun of them for being very methodical in the ways that they worship God? Methodists, yeah. And you knew that. If not, I'm reminding you of that. The term Methodist was originally a slang term that the kids at Oxford used to make fun of the Methodists for how methodical they were studying the scriptures and praying and meeting together. But that word stuck, and Wesley claimed it, and that was the start of the Methodist movement. John Wesley had an opportunity to be a missionary in the colony of Georgia. The colonies were forming at this time across the pond, across the Atlantic Ocean. And in Georgia, things didn't go very well for John Wesley. And that's a whole story in and of itself. And as he headed back to England with his tail tucked between his legs, he wrote in his journal, "I went to America to convert the Indians, but oh, who shall convert me?" He was a minister, but he didn't feel that he was saved. He was really wrestling with his salvation. On the ship headed back to England, it got into a big storm. And there were Moravians on the deck of the ship that were singing and praising God in the midst of the storm. And Wesley was just impressed with their faith in the midst of how the ship couldn't sink. And Wesley doubted his faith all the more. He really wrestled with his faith for some time, until you know the story of Aldersgate Street. He was headed to a Bible study, and on Aldersgate Street, he heard the preface to the book of Romans being read by Martin Luther, and he felt his heart strangely warm. And he accepted God's grace for himself, and he was filled with the power of the Spirit, and he was now a man that went out to do open-air preaching. Now, after his conversion experience, set on fire by God, his heart was strangely warmed, he joined Whitfield and other people from the Holy Club, and others that were doing this open-air preaching. This hadn't been done before. And thousands of people would come and gather around in different spots all over England as they did the open-air preaching to the common people. The Church of England didn't like this one bit, and they rejected Wesley. They kicked him out of the Anglican Church, told him never to come back because of him preaching salvation by faith, going out to the masses. But John Wesley, many years over his ministry, he would travel some 4,000 miles. By the time of his death, there were 70,000 people who would claim to be Methodists in Europe. John Wesley leaves behind a rich and a wonderful legacy of Methodism. And Methodism was the start of something called the Great Awakening, a great revival that started with this open-air field preaching and spread through all of Europe, really saving it from the gin craze, saving it from the economic and spiritual and the devastating things that were going on. And this Great Awakening was so powerful